Welcome back to The Heat. As we mark the 70th anniversary of one of the world's greatest battles, we continue our discussion now about D-Day. Joining me here in Washington is Jorge Benitez. He is a senior fellow at the Brent Scowcroft Center on International Relations, and he specializes in NATO and transatlantic relations. Joining us from Shanghai in China is Andranik Megranyan. He is the director of the Institute for Democracy and Cooperation, and he's a former professor at Moscow State Institute of International Relations. Welcome to both of you to the show. George, let me start with you. The United States played a key role in the D-Day invasion. Many Americans lost their lives then. Many people will tell you that this was the invasion that turned the tide of war in Europe. What does the day mean for Americans?
For America, D-Day is a decisive day in which we opened the second front on the European continent. D-Day cost us over 6,000 American deaths in the first 24 hours. It's a tremendous day, both in terms of what the United States did to restore freedom for the European continent then, and it's also a symbol of what NATO stands for today, because most of the allies that we had on D-Day are the same allies that we have in NATO today.
Andranik, when you listen to some of the current American leaders like Hillary Clinton refer to Vladimir Putin as a Nazi, is that deeply insulting to the Russian people? As we know now, Russia played a huge role in conquering Nazi Germany.
It's very insulting, and it's the result of either ignorance or deliberate attempt to humiliate or insult Russian leader. Unfortunately, demonization of Putin is a commonplace now in Western media and political circles, and this greatly mentioned Henry Kissinger, demonization of Putin is not a policy. They need to formulate policy line and take seriously and understand Putin, his motives and his actions. Because really D-Day is a great day for Americans, but everybody knows that without Soviet Union and Soviet army, nobody could crush Hitler and Nazi Germany.
George, how important is it that President Putin is in France right now? You know, there was one of George W. Bush's former speechwriters, David Frum, writing in the Atlantic magazine, who said it's a mistake to invite Putin to this.
I would go even stronger. I'd say it's a disgrace to invite Putin to Normandy. What we see is the Russian people, through their great sacrifice and courage in World War II, helped turn the tide against the Nazis. Russia has a place in the Normandy celebrations, but Mr. Putin does not, because of his actions, because of the things he has done in bringing war back to Europe. For 69 years since D-Day, the borders and the end of World War II, the borders of Europe have not changed. There has been peace in Europe. But because of the Russian invasion of Crimea and their continued provocations in the Ukraine, we have instability. And the comparison between Hitler and Mr. Putin is because Hitler started World War II by changing the borders of Europe and using the excuse of protecting ethnic Germans in other countries.
So what are you saying? You're saying President Putin is Hitler?
He's doing the same things. He's changing the borders of Europe using military force, and he's doing it with the excuse of to protect ethnic Russians. And that's why the rest of his neighbors and Europe are concerned.
Andranik, do you want to respond to that?
Oh, sure. Listen, first of all, Putin gave, a higher, he gave some more greater significance to the event in Normandy because he is the only superstar among modern politicians in the world. It's not incidental that even American political circles and many pundits and analysts consider him the best and more experienced and knowledgeable politician in the world. First, and second, no annexation happened in Crimea. There was a referendum and rejoining Crimea with Russia. And I think that one must be very accurate when choosing the terms and giving definitions which are irrelevant to reality.
Okay, George, I don't want to get bogged down with a discussion over Ukraine, but would it not be a bigger insult to the memories of the 20 million Russians who died in the Second World War by not inviting Putin, by not having a Russian representative there?
I don't agree. I think there's a legitimate place for Russian veterans to be at Normandy to celebrate the courage that the Russian people did and the sacrifices they made in fighting against the Nazi regime. But Putin is the type of leader just as Hitler was. We can't blame the German people for the atrocities committed by Hitler and his regime. But at the same time, you have to stand up against leaders that make bad decisions that bring violence and war back to the continent of Europe.
Should Angela Merkel be there?
She should be, because she has not invaded another country and she has not tried to protect ethnic Germans in other countries as well.
Andronik, to what extent are we seeing the old Cold War mindset here when it comes to how the West deals with Russia? You know, if we look at the expansion of NATO, if we look at the rhetoric that's coming out of Washington, out of London, out of the recent G7 summit, is that Cold War mindset still there?
Really, it's a Cold War mindset, but it's not the problem of Russia. It's the problem of Russian partners. Because in 90s, Western countries, especially Washington and Brussels, they used to deal with Russia as a defeated country, as a country which has nothing to say in world politics. And since mid-2000s, especially since Munich speech of Putin, Westerners became more and more irritated and angry because Russia doesn't want to be inferior, to be second-rate country, or to be dependent. And Russia very clearly formulated its aims and goals and demands equal treatment, demands respect, and demands to take seriously its interests. And this is irritating a lot of politicians and pundits in Washington and in some other Western capitals. This has nothing to do with Putin. Russia became stronger. Russia wants its respected place at the table. This is the problem. Unfortunately, many politicians and experts who live in Cold War era, they don't want, or they live in early 90s when United States was the only superpower after collapse of Soviet Union. They don't want to come, to agree with the new reality, and new reality is here, and they have to deal with the new reality.
George?
I think that the problem is that whether we call it a Cold War or not, it's not a question of labels, it's a question of actions. And the actions are clearly dangerous. The Russian actions have been a threat to their neighbors, and they're all based on the fact that these are decisions made by Putin. We can't forget the fact that Ukrainians were dying yesterday, Ukrainians are dying today, and Ukrainians may die tomorrow because of the decisions made by Vladimir Putin.
Well, I mean, if we use that argument, and I don't want to get, I don't want to go off at a tangent here.
That's absolutely wrong. The problem is, unfortunately, when Yanukovych was president, Vice President Biden was calling many times and asking him not to use force. But when now Kiev authorities are using force, are using artillery, tanks, aircrafts against their own people, killing them in mass, and tens of thousands of people fled the country, at this moment, everybody is blaming Putin instead of telling these thugs in Kiev, stop killing your people, stop killing your citizens. If you want integrity of the country, and if you want peace, and if you want to protect the lives of your citizens.
Okay, I don't want to talk about Ukraine. This is about the D-Day commemoration. Does this commemoration in France present an opportunity? All the big leaders are there. Does it present an opportunity for these leaders to get together? There have been talks, minimal talks, between President Obama and President Putin, but can it break the ice there? Can they set something?
I don't think so. I think the focus here is spent so much on celebrating what happened 70 years ago. It's not the right forum to have a substantive and serious discussions of the current crisis we have today. And that's what needed, a negotiated solution.
Okay, Andronik, do you think that there is an opportunity in Normandy right now, with President Obama there, with David Cameron there, with President Putin there, for some kind of rapprochement, for these leaders to get together, break the ice, and try and negotiate their way out of this?
Yeah, I think that President Putin used this opportunity again to formulate very clearly Russia's position on Ukrainian issue. And Russia's position was very clear and even supported by such very different people like Zbigniew Brzezinski and Henry Kissinger. Russia demanded not too much. To keep territorial integrity of Ukraine, there was necessary for these people who seized the power and organized coup against Yanukovych to agree with three elements, which was Russia's proposals. Non-bloc status of Ukraine, Russian language as second state language, and federalization of Ukraine. That's it. This is normal for every civilized country, and if Ukraine wanted to be civilized, and if our partners really were serious, taking seriously Russia's concerns, they had to make a pressure and to force these people in Kiev to agree with these very reasonable proposals made by Russian government.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there, gentlemen. Thanks for joining us. We've run out of time. But once again, thanks a lot. And that is it for this edition of The Heat. We'd love to hear from you, so please send us your questions, comments, and story ideas to theheat@cctv-america.com. And you can now listen to CCTV America programs 24/7 from anywhere in the United States by simply calling 231-460-1199. I'm Arnold Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.